Well, welcome everybody to this episode of Transplant Talks. I'm Rachel Davis, a psychiatrist, living donor, and mentor for the American Transplant Foundation. And my co-host is Anastasia Henry.
Hi, everybody. Excited to be here.
Anastasia is executive director of the American Transplant Foundation. And today we have the pleasure of interviewing Nick Vust. Nick is a nurse practitioner and pilot from Iowa. In addition to working in a rural emergency room, he is a pilot with his parents' company, Midwest Flying Services Incorporated. Nick transports organs for transplantation, and I'm excited to get some behind-the-scenes insight from Nick today. Welcome, Nick.
Yeah, thank you for happy to be here.
Yeah, so why don't you start out by telling us a little bit how you got into this business, because it's a pretty niche thing to be doing.
It is. It's a very niche industry to be, especially in the aviation aspect. So my parents started our charter company 32 years ago, right after I was born. We started off with just a small little airplane, and we flew pretty much just passengers around the United States. And it wasn't until about 5 years ago we got contacted by a company to do our very first organ transplant flight. And of course, organ transplant flights happen usually in the middle of the night because it's about the only time that the operating rooms have open or availability. So my dad kind of him and hawed about it, and he looked at me and goes, "Do you want to do it?" And I said, "Yeah, it's something different. Let's try it out." And so we did our first organ transplant flight, and it was from that point on my dad was sold. That's the direction of a career he wanted to take our company, and that's eventually what we transitioned to. And now I would say probably 99.9% of our flights are organ transplant flights.
So what was it about that flight that like sold him on this? What?
It was the adrenaline, because now he's like, yeah, we got a time critical organ on board. It was the teams that were showing up and like, yep, let's get going. And then once we got it all said and done, we got back to the airport, and we sat there and talked about like, yeah, we just helped save a life doing something that I was not say used to, but I've done it with my career in the hospital. But for him, it was his first time actually experiencing something like that, and he felt like it was him finally being able to give back to the aviation aspect, and it's just not us flying around a bunch of rich people per se, but more us giving somebody a chance of life on the other end. So he was really sold at that point.
Nick, for our listeners and viewers on YouTube, can you talk a little bit or a lot about the basics? So what organs, are these organs from living donors? Are these organs from deceased donors? Where are the organs coming from, and what organs do you transport?
So yeah, we transport every organ out there from heart to pancreas to the intestinal tract, which we do for the University of Omaha. So pretty much we do every organ, and then there is some time frame requirements for these organs, and most of them are from brain dead donors that are clinically brain dead that we go in and harvest or procure, I should say. And then there are some living donors, but not much living, more brain dead, legally brain dead donors. I would say probably takes up 90% of the flights that we have.
And can you take us through the typical timeline? How much time do you have, under how much pressure you operate?
Yeah, so timeline can be anywhere from a 24-hour notice to hey, what's the quickest you can be in Omaha or Chicago timeframe. So we have the luxury of living close to the airport that we fly out of. Me and my dad do. So if there is one where they said, "What's the quickest you can be in the air?" Usually it's about the quickest we can be in the air from when we get the phone call to when we're dressed and out the door and have the jet outside firing up. It's about 20 minutes. So
Mm,
we can be airborne fairly quickly.
that's
And with
great.
yeah, so and with our bigger jets, they're fairly fast, so we can get anywhere in the Midwest in under an hour. So we can get from Northwest Iowa to Chicago in an hour. We can get from Midwest to Denver in an hour. There's times where we've even flown all the way to the East and West Coast to pick up a team and help them if they need if one of their airplanes has a mechanical or stuff like that. But I would say most of the time we get like a maybe 2 to 4 hour window of heads up saying, "Hey, you have a trip. You need to be in Omaha at 12 o'clock, and it's 8 o'clock in the morning." I'd say majority of the time it's 2 to 4 hour notice.
That's the notice. And can you explain like how much time do you have basically for organ to
Yep.
be in great condition? What's the
Yep.
timeline?
So we for hearts, most of the teams, when it comes to hearts, like to be out of they don't want the heart out more than about a 3 to 4 hour window. Four is really pushing it with the heart. The lungs, they're comfortable with every little hospital we fly seems to be a little bit different with lungs. Some are okay with 6 hours, some like it 4 hours window frame of being out of the donor to the recipient. And then liver, usually 6 hours, and then kidneys, they got a long shelf life. I've seen kidneys sit there for 3, 4 hours before we even get there, and then it's another 3 hour flight. So usually they tell us 8 hours with the kidneys.
Mhm.
And logistically, how are you transporting the organs? Are they just in a box? Are they being perfused? How are
Yep.
they?
So I would say it's 50-50 right now. We do a lot of just in a cooler, in a box or a cooler that's got ice in there. That was, I would say, if 3 years ago, I would say that was 90% of them. There's some new machines on the market. Transmedic makes an OCS, which is a machine that mimics being inside the human body. So the heart beats, it pumps blood through it, and it oxygenates the blood. The lungs, it breathes for the lungs. The liver, it pumps blood through the liver and produce bile. There is a new machine that we are flying with. It's called Ex Vivo. The University of Omaha has really started to switch to it, and it does the same thing as like an OCS machine does, but it doesn't make the heart beat. It just perfuses cooled blood through the heart, and it's a fairly new machine, and they're having great success with it. So I would say probably nowadays, especially a lot of other facilities, I would say probably 80% of them are on a perfusion machine of some sort, just because it helps extend their lives tremendously. I know we've done some hearts where it's on the machine 4 or 5 hours, and as long as it's on the machine, they don't seem to be too concerned. Our longest transplant flight we've ever done was we took a heart from Anchorage, Alaska to Boston on a machine, and we stopped in Williston, North Dakota for fuel. So that was about a 4 hour flight to Williston, and then another 4 hour flight over to Boston. And so it was on the machine. I think they said by the end of the whole thing was roughly 10 hours. And they said it came off the machine perfectly, and it was able to be transplanted, and they had absolutely no issue with it. So there's new technology that's coming out that's really making I would say, shelf life of these organs extendable by quite a bit. And so it's taken a little pressure off us a little bit, but there's still some more pressure on, the donor's not doing, or the donor's not doing good, so we got to get there sooner. The recipient is not doing good, so we really need to get back to the home base as quick as we can. So it's taken some pressure off us, but there's still quite a bit of time frame that we still have to worry about. And it's heartbreaking to hear some of the stories of why we're going to where we're going, and we get to see both ends of it, because we know, unfortunately, we're coming to be the people who are taking somebody's organ, and there's a family who is in desperate um or the family on the other end is in desperate need of this organ, and then there's a family on the donor side who is mourning and full of sorrow because they lost a loved one. So it's different because we get to be on both sides of the story, saying there's sadness, but at the end of the day, we brought somebody that gift of life, and now if it's a dad, he gets to see his kids grow up, a mom gets to see her kids grow up, a grandparents get to see grandkids. We always try to think of it on that side. So, but there's still times where we hear what we're going for, and it's sorrow, especially when we see 5, 6 other teams there that are all procuring organs, and we're just one of 6, and it's sad to say, but it's almost like turkey vultures. We just all swoop in and we all go our separate ways, but all 6 of us are bringing somebody else a shot at life. So it's it is chilling, but we just like to think about the backside of it, where we're bringing somebody the hope and joy of living longer.
Yeah. I think that everyone who works in the organ recovery field treats organs with so much care and so much thoughtfulness. And so if anyone, some of my friends or community members, they'll ask, well, who will care for my organ if I were to pass away, and if I were to die at the specific circumstances that I can become an organ donor? It's like there's so many processes and procedures in place that will make sure that it's in the best possible shape and it can save somebody's life. I'm curious, have you watched this movie? It came out earlier this year with Hilary Swank, and it's called Ordinary Angels.
I have not. No, I should watch.
Yes, and it was all about how these pilots they save a life of a little girl, and they were transporting a girl in need of a transplant. Have you ever had a chance to do that, to transport somebody on the transplant wait list?
No, we've never had the ability to transfer anybody that's on the wait list themselves. We have only just flown the transplant teams down to where we procure from the donor and bring them back. So we've never had the opportunity to do that.
Okay. All right.
What's it like when you transport the procurement teams?
Oh, that we our procurement teams that we fly are amazing. Like we fly a lot for the University of Iowa, a lot for the Nebraska Medicine, and I I've gone grown up and learned to be these procurement teams by first name. I mean, I have a lot of them on Snapchat. We talk even when I'm not flying. A lot of them we'll send Snapchats to each other when we finally get a day off of when we're golfing and bragging to each other that we get a chance to golf. But these teams are amazing. They're caring. They don't complain about anything. Um, they're there to do their job and they're amazing at it. I don't know if I've ever run across a team where I'm like, "Ugh, I don't know if they belong in this industry."
Mm.
I would say majority of those people they have a passion and they love what they do, and a lot of them that I have flown are still doing what they're doing 5 years later. I know I used to fly one out of Grand Rapids, Michigan. She was gonna switch careers, and I think she was going to cardiac cath. She was a coordinator, and I think like a month later, I flew her again, and she's like, "Yeah, it wasn't made for me. This is where I belong." And so these teams, they are devoted to what they do, and I their schedules, their life schedules are so hectic, especially some of the surgeons. I mean, the amount of hours they're on, and from one case to another, that's where we as a family owned company really strive to do what we can for these teams, because we know that these 3 hours that they're on the plane or 2 hour flight might be the only 2 3 hours of rest they get. So we're going to do everything in our power as a flight team to keep these guys comfortable. If they need anything, make sure we have it. If they want, so we've gotten to the point where we know certain people like certain snacks or certain pops, so we make sure we have that stuff on board the airplane. And so we always try to do what we can for them the best we can, just because we know their schedules, and they might have had two prior transplants, and now they're on their third one for the 24 hours, and there have been, hardly any sleep. So we do as much as we can as a family to make sure that these guys get everything they need and the rest they need while they're with us.
Well, and a lot of people may not know what a procurement team is. So can you explain that and who is on that team and what
Yeah.
the
So
purpose of that is?
Yeah, so a procurement team is usually they we pick them up at the recipient's hospital, so they're going to be the people who are putting the organ into the recipient. Most of the time, it's with an organ like a transplant coordinator and a nurse, the surgeon, and sometimes if we have a machine, we have a perfusionist that rides along with us, and they're in charge of making sure that the organ is being perfused correctly on the machine. And then once in a while, we have some med students that come with that, they get to get their experience of it. So most of the time, it's at least the surgeon and a coordinator. And then, yeah, like I said, once in a while, a perfusionist. And sometimes we have a couple surgeons or a couple nurses that come along, or coordinators that come along, depending on the case. And then there's sometimes where we just fly the perfusionist. If the hospital doesn't have a donor, or not a donor, the hospital doesn't have the recipient hospital doesn't have a heart surgeon or a surgeon in general available, maybe the perfusionist and the machine will fly down with us, and we'll go still procure the organ, and then but it'll be like an in-house cardiovascular surgeon who grabs the heart and gives it to the perfusionist, and then he's in charge of it all the way back. So there's times where we just fly it to perfusionist, but most of the time it's a coordinator and the surgeon at the minimum.
So you have a very personal story, a personal story of some health scare involved
Yep.
your heart. You were 15. You had an open heart surgery at the age of 15. You were told you could not fly any commercial aircraft. What happened? How did you overcome that circumstance?
Yep. So 15 years old, normal middle school, freshman in high school, running around. Kept having chest pain when I was running around. They kept telling me it's asthma. Finally, a doctor here in my hometown, a Dr. Badberg, was like, "Yeah, I don't think this is pulmonary. Seems to be cardiac." And at the time, my parents were like, "No way. You're a 15-year-old kid. You're healthy." And so went to cardiologist, was diagnosed with anomaly of the right coronary artery. That was on a Thursday, I believe. And that following Monday, I was up at Mayo Clinic having open heart surgery. Told me I'd never play sports again. Yeah, never be a pilot just because it's a rare open heart surgery. I was one of the first ones to ever have it done the way they did it at Mayo Clinic. I was in a study trial for a bunch of years of my life, and so I had no way you'd ever be a pilot. So that's when I shifted to the healthcare direction. My sister was a nurse at the time. She is now she was a nurse practitioner. She's a doctorate a nurse practitioner, and she's an instructor as well. So I was like, well, I loved the medical field when I was getting my the whole open heart surgery process. So went to nursing school. In the meantime, when I was in late high school, I was able to get a thing called a sports pilot license, which allows me to just fly with one other person in a two-person airplane, fly during the day, can't fly at night. It's got to be beautiful weather kind of thing. So I did that from probably, I think I was about a junior in high school until I was about I think a freshman or sophomore in college. I finally sat with my dad. I said, I'm healthy. I played high school football a month after I had open heart surgery. I
Mm.
played 4 years of high school
Wow.
football. I had no issues. I played all the sports, track, the whole 9 yards, never once had an issue. I think I should try to get my pilot's medical. And the problem is if I get denied my pilot's medical, I can't even fly my two-person airplane anymore.
Mm.
I'm what we call grounded at that point.
That's a problem.
That's a big problem, especially when I was literally born and raised around an airport, and that's all I ever wanted to do growing up was fly airplanes. So I took the gamble. I went and met with a cardiologist up at Mayo. We did a stress test. I ran on the treadmill for 35 minutes, and he finally was like, "Okay, you're good. You've maxed out the machine, and you're still trucking along just fine. So that's not an issue." And then I met with a doctor down in Whiting, Iowa, Dr. Gerard, and brought him all my cardiac paperwork, and he said, "I think I can get you your medical. Let's give it a shot." So submitted the paperwork, waited and waited and waited, and I think 4 or 5 months went by before I finally got the letter back saying that I had been approved for a third class medical. So at that point, it allowed me to go at least get my private pilot's license, and then you have to have a second class medical at minimum to be a commercial pilot, which requires a little more, um, I wouldn't say testing, but thorough investigation. And so I applied for that. I got approved that day for it, and from that point on, my dad then started giving me the rest of my ratings I needed to be where I'm at, and so then pretty much the rest was history. I got my dad taught me to fly our twin engine airplanes. I got my multi-engine rating. I got my instrument rating, which allows me to fly in bad weather, and then he gave me my first what we call as a type rating, which is what you need to fly jets as his co-pilot. So he gave me my first type rating in our small jet, and that was, I think, 6 years ago, 6 years ago. And since then, I've now become a captain in our large jets. And
Yay.
yeah, now, so I was able to move forward with that. But now I get to dabble in both worlds. I still get to do what I love in the emergency department and also get to fly on the side. So, I mean, it's the best of both worlds.
I love that. That's the story of perseverance. That
Yep.
sometimes, as I was preparing for this podcast, I thought in my own life, when was that defining moment that if I were to say, I guess it is what it is, my entire life would be different? I don't know
Yep.
about you, Rachel. For me, it was when I was 8 years old and I got my first D. It was in my English class, and I was devastated. I never wanted to take another English class because my family didn't speak any English. They couldn't help me. I couldn't understand anything when it came to grammar and English as a language. So I was ready to give up. And at that moment, I thought, I just want to figure it out. My family didn't have money for tutors, but luckily we had a family friend who was an English teacher. All it took is just to give me the structure for grammar and a little bit of encouragement. And here I am today, right? It changed my entire life. So I think we all have that moment, defining moment, where we just have to believe in ourselves. Even it feels like it's close to impossible, but we can do it. And you can do it. Anybody who's listening to us right now.
I'm I'm curious, Nick, do you have a most memorable flight or a story you'd want to share with us?
I think the most memorable flight I had was our longest trip which was from Anchorage, Alaska to Boston. Um, that trip required us to take two sets of crews. So me as a captain with one co-pilot, and my dad as the other captain with his other co-pilot. And that trip actually started off here in Northwest Iowa. And me and my co-pilot initially flew from here to Chicago. We picked up a perfusionist, flew from Chicago to Seattle to pick up the heart transplant surgeon, flew from Seattle to Boston, or not Boston, Seattle to Anchorage, Alaska, while they went and procured the organ. And at that time, my dad was in the back with our co-pilot. They came on duty as a captain and the co-pilot, and me and my co-pilot went off to what we call off duty, because when you have 10 hours of off duty time, and went to the back of the plane and hung out in the back of the plane when my dad flew from Anchorage to Boston. And I think it was one of the longest flights that we've ever done, and um, that our perfusionist had ever done. And so it was a milestone because it was one of the longest times that the heart had ever been on that kind of machine before. And so it was something that I truly enjoyed because it was an adventure, and it was something I got to share with my dad. It was a memory that I will have for the rest of my life because it's something my dad and I did together. And so I think that one sticks out in my mind the most because it was just something that it took a lot of logistical aspects of it to get it all to line up perfectly. And it was funny because my dad was actually flying when this all started to happen, when the company that we fly for that does all of our logistical uh, aspect of transplant flying. So when he landed and I called him, I said, "You're never going to believe the trip we got tonight." And I explained it to him, and he couldn't believe it either, that we're doing such a huge trip and we're going to take two teams. So I think it was just one of the biggest ones that stuck out to me. And just because, yeah, I got to share this whole entire experience with my dad, him and I got to do it together. And it was going to when the perfusionist was telling us, a recipient who was in a desperate need of a heart, who was a father, kids. So it was something that we knew, we had to get the job done. And yeah, and we had a couple setbacks in flight. The machine sprung a leak at one point in time and had blood pouring out of it. And I had to help our perfusionist keep it level while he tried to figure out where it was leaking from. And so it was an adventure to say the least, and it was just something cool that we were able to do. And I got to share it with my dad. So
Yeah, that's incredible. That's incredible. Yeah.
yeah, and there's always, I feel like every flight, there's never one flight that's the same. I could fly the same flight from Omaha to Chicago 10,000 times, and every flight's different. There's always something different. I would say the biggest issue we have most of the time as pilots is weather. We have to deal with weather all the time, and that kind of gets to be hard when our industry with the organ procurement flying, because we have to keep weather as a safety factor, but at the same time, we have to also use it as, a reason, like, yeah, I know somebody needs an organ, but if it's not safe to go, we're not going to push it. One life isn't worth losing seven lives because of an accident because of weather. So I think that gets to be kind of hard, especially for us as our family owned company, because we take it personally. This is our livelihood, that if we have to say no because of a weather, it's hard for us because we know the frustration on everybody's end. But at the end of the day, yeah, if we don't make it to where we're supposed to go, we're not helping the recipient because we didn't make it down there because we crashed or something. So weather is always a big factor in what we have to do on a day-to-day basis.
Mhm. In my job as the director of the American Transplant Foundation, one of my favorite parts of the job is meeting the families, knowing them in the very beginning of their transplant journey, when they just feel lost, unsupported, and seeing them step by step moving through every single stage of the process, and finally celebrating with them receiving a transplant or donating an organ, and just seeing them living their best life after the transplant surgery. Have you ever had a chance to meet someone who actually received the organ that you were transporting?
I have through TikTok. So I've had people message me saying, "I saw you fly somewhere on this date. Was this you?" Like, it was us. We did bring that organ on that date through this year. So I have through TikTok, talked to some people that we've flown their organs for. Um, I do, especially on like certain cases, I do text like a lot of the University of Nebraska. I'll text the coordinator or the perfusionist and say, hey, how did it turn out? I know that, that was a pretty sick patient we were bringing an organ to. How'd they turn out? And so I do get to, hear for once in a while how they turned out. But there's a lot of the times where if it's not a normal team that we fly on a day-to-day basis that we know personally, that we just drop them off and go home and never hear anything about it again. So there's always that thought of, how did that person turn out? How did that organ survive? So that's kind of a rough part of this job. If it's somebody we normally don't fly, but a lot of the times, we'll fly the same team multiple times in a week. And so it's like, oh yeah, how'd that heart turn out yesterday? Or how'd the lungs go? And oh, yep, went great. So it's nice to at least have that aspect of it where we do find out some way that yep, everything turned out good.
And speaking of TikTok, American Transplant Foundation, we just started our TikTok account. How can you tell us about how you found yourself on TikTok and where can people find you on TikTok?
Yeah, so my sister, which is funny enough, was like, you should really post these videos that you guys take. Cause I used to post them on Facebook here and there. And she's like, there are just some stunning videos that you guys get at night flying across the country and the views you get to see. She's like, you should really post it. And that was about when TikTok was kind of newer. I would say it'd been out for a few months, but I had not downloaded or anything. So I started posting a couple of videos and it was anything crazy. But then I posted one, and it was a video with the heart beating on the machine. And that one I would, quote unquote, went viral and got millions of views and likes. And I think that point was when I started to get a lot of more followers and a lot more comments and a lot more people messaging me about it. And so yeah, that was kind of I would say the turning point in my quote unquote social media aspect of it. So but yeah, so I mean, I try to video at least one thing on every flight we do. That way, people can see it. And it's a different part of the world that a lot of people don't get to experience on a day-to-day basis. And it's a different world that even pilots don't get to experience on a day-to-day basis just because of the aspect of flying. I mean, there's a few companies out there that do what we do discreetly, just like we do. So, I mean, they get experience, but um, there's a lot of kids, even like upcoming pilots who are learning to become pilots that didn't even know this was a possibility. So I have a lot of, new pilots, student pilots reach out to me and ask me, what it takes and criteria to become where I am today. So it's been kind of a cool little tool to meet other people and, tell them how to advance their careers to this point. So.
Well, and I have to say that's how I came across you was that you showed up on my For You page on TikTok and your videos are stunning. So,
What it's funny is there's many nights and I will be flying across the country and we have to talk to air traffic controllers as we fly across the country. They keep us safe, keep us separated from other airplanes, tell us where we need to be and what to do. And there is people who will recognize our tail number, which is our identifying number on the airplane, and recognize and be like, that's the airplane I seen on TikTok. And they'll ask, is this Nick on TikTok with the organ transplant flying? And my dad will be like, no, but it's his father if he's flying and he gets asked this question. And they're like, oh, well, tell him so and so watches his videos. And so it's kind of funny because yeah, there's a lot of that where we live in such a small community. And when we take off out of here and we contact Minneapolis Center, who's the center that's in charge of our airspace around here, they're always like, oh, Nick, where are you going tonight? What are you going to get tonight? So it's gotten to be quite interesting that even people who I've never even seen before, never met, can recognize my airplane or my voice and what we're doing. Or if we're coming out of Sheldon as a medevac at 1 o'clock in the morning, they know exactly where we're going. So, we'll sit there and chat back and forth a little bit about it. So it's got to be quite interesting. And I've had people even at airports come up to me and be like, oh, are you the one on TikTok? So it was kind of an eye opener. So my dad and my parents always say, "Oh, the famous one's here." So I'm like,
Yeah. Yeah, that's amazing.
"Yeah."
That's
But
great.
yeah, and like the one thing I do have to give, I have to give a shout out to is the company who does our logistical aspect of organ transplants. They're called NORA, National Organ Recovery Agency. They're based out of Chicago. They do all of the logistical aspects. They line up the ground transportation. They figure out what time the ORs are. They communicate between the organ procurement teams and the ground transportation and us. They call us. They say, you got to be in Omaha at 12 o'clock at night for a 1.5 hour flight to be down in Houston for a 2 o'clock OR time. So they are amazing. We work hand in hand with them. I know a lot. have a lot of their employees, a lot of their dispatch employees on social media and Snapchat, talk to them personally on a day-to-day basis. They're amazing. They are great to work with, and what they do is insane. The logistical aspects of everything is just mind-boggling that they can get, and there's sometimes where they're not just working one airplane. They might have 5 or 6 airplanes for one donor. So they have to get 5 or 6 airplanes all at the same donor facility, airport, all at the same time, have ground transportation, all of them there for the same time. So everybody gets there at the exact same time. And then not just that, but now they got to take all those airplanes and make sure that they get to their destinations all at the correct time, and that their ground transportation on that end is all lined up, and that they're talking to the recipient teams to make sure they're all good to go on their end with their OR time. So they're absolutely amazing with what they do, and that's who we're contracted to fly through for the last 5, 5, 6 years, and they just people that I talk to on a day-to-day basis, and yeah, they're all amazing that work there.
Mhm. Just yesterday, I heard that a friend of a friend passed away tragically, and he just slept in his own living room. He relatively young, slept in the living room, broke his hip, had a hip replacement surgery, and 2 days later, he died of complications. So it's just such a reminder how fragile our lives, and in certain situations, organs are recovered and someone's life will be saved as a result of that. And it's just such a beautiful reminder when you lose your loved one, but then you will potentially meet somebody else and you'll be able to hear that heartbeat in somebody else's body and just be reminded of the circle of life. Speaking of air traffic controllers, do they give you any like preferential treatment?
Yep. Yeah. So we're filed as medevac. So we usually get pretty good handling into larger airports. They try to work us in as best as they can. There is times when we're flying into big airports like Chicago Midway or O'Hare where they try their hardest to get us in as quick as they can, but sometimes there's just so many airplanes that we get stuck in line. But a lot of the times we are, time critical when when we have an organ on board. So they're always really good about getting us from point A to point B as quick as they can. There's sometimes we have to fly out of bigger airports, what we call departure sequences, where we have to fly to certain waypoints and be at certain altitudes and certain airspeeds. And we usually get maybe to the first waypoint, and then the controllers get on and clear us direct to our destination. So they do a great job trying to get us from point A to point B when they can. But like I said, there is some times where there's just too many airplanes and too much traffic going in and out of airports where their hands are kind of tied and they can only do what they can. But they do their best they can, and they usually save us a lot of time and headaches and hassles trying to get into larger airports.
Yeah, that's great. Like last week I was traveling and we arrived and then sat at the gate for 70 minutes just waiting. And next time if that happens, I'll think maybe there is that plane carrying precious organs and let them go first and we can sit for as long as it takes.
Yep, and that's the thing. Like I've noticed that too. They'll vector or move other airplanes around to get us in, and I've never once heard people complain about it. Other pilots complain like, "Well, what the heck? Why are they letting them in?" I think as a pilot standpoint, they understand if we're a medevac, we have something on board, or have even if it's just a human, transporting a patient, we're medevac for a reason, and everybody seems to understand that it is what it is, and they know that's just part of it. So.
That's a good perspective, though, things we wouldn't necessarily think of as we're sitting on the tarmac waiting.
Yeah, I know. My parents flew to South Africa a couple weeks ago, and they were on the tarmac for 2.5 hours waiting to go. And my dad's like, "Yeah, it could just be a bunch of medevacs coming in," and they're in New York, and I'm like, "No, it's not a bunch of medevacs." I know you like to tell yourself that, but it's probably not that.
It's
So
comforting, Nick. It's very
yeah,
comforting.
yeah.
Yeah, that's great.
Well, Nick, anything else you think our listeners would like to know about what you do?
Yeah, I don't, I get a lot of kids that ask, how do I get to where you are? And I just tell them, you just got to get your ratings and your hours. And there's no special requirement as a pilot to be a medevac pilot or a pilot who flies organ transplant teams. And I think that might be some of the biggest like communication is people think that we're some special pilot that flies and has special training, and we don't. We're just your normal aviation commercial jet pilots that fly and just had a niche, and then we got into it. So yeah, and then and the other biggest thing that I always seem to run into is, and it's a comment I get a lot, is that people think that we're flying all these rich organs around for rich people, and I always have to alliterate people that that has monetary value, has nothing to do with organ transplant. Doesn't matter how much money you have, how much money you make. If you're a donor, your organs are flown around on a jet no matter what, or a small airplane. I mean, it's not the rich out there buying organs, and I think that's one of the biggest miscommunications and some of the comments I get all the time. And I have to tell people that has nothing to do with all these organs. 99% of the time, we don't have any clue who is who on what these organs are donor wise and what they came from. So I always like to tell people that, like, it's not, there's nothing monetary about any of this. This is just what we do, and is what a country does with our organ transplant, and how we get all of these organs procured into the new recipients. So
That's an excellent point, that it is actually covered by the insurance of the
yep,
organ recipient. So you don't
yep,
have to worry about the cost of
nope,
the transportation.
eh,
I have one more question.
yeah.
Looking back 10 years, so how much progress has been made when it comes to organ transportation? And then looking forward 10 years, what do you see in the next 10 years when it comes to transporting organs? Where will we be?
I look back 10 years ago, and we started doing this like 6 years ago. And I feel like in the last 6 years, the technology has advanced tremendously, which allows us to go farther. Prior to that, it was pretty localized to where you were flying. You didn't really want to fly more than 2, 3 hours because you run the risk of, running out of time for these organs. And now with the new advance in technologies between the Sherpa packs and the OCS machine, Ex Vivo, and all of them, and the lung guard, it allows us to take these organs all the way from the coast to coast. We're not so centralized. Midwest donors and recipients only get Midwest donors and recipients. We can now go from the West Coast and bring an organ all the way to the East Coast and still have a viable organ, which is something I think like 10 years ago, it didn't happen as often. And so we've noticed that in the last few years, our trips have gotten longer and longer. We've gone longer, and now we really don't seem to have a limit on where we can go from the Midwest to bring organs around. So I see that I see technology getting better, allowing us to have longer times for these organs. And then I think in the next 10 years, as well as everybody knows who works in the medical field, the donor list doesn't get smaller. It seems just to keep getting bigger and bigger, or the recipient list keeps being bigger and bigger, and the people needing organs just keeps growing more and more. So I see that it's just going to keep growing as we progress in the future. And I just hope people become donors and sign up to be a donor, and don't believe in the stipulations that we as healthcare providers don't do everything for our patients to, keep them alive. And I think that's where I get to have a little mission to say, because I work in the ER. I'm the only provider when I work in the ER by myself. I don't have a doctor with me. I'm just by myself. And I tell people, I'm not looking at your donor card when I'm doing CPR. I am doing whatever I can to save your life. There is no like, oh, they're a donor, we should just try to, keep them alive somewhat to get their organs. That's not a
Never.
thing. And I think that's another issue I see a lot. And I don't know if it's our generation that's coming up, that I just seem to be a lot more younger generation, doesn't know much about it. But I fight for that. And I just tell them, I work in both worlds, and I'm telling you, I don't do anything different if you're a donor or not. I'm there to save your life and do what I can to keep you alive. And that's what we do. So I hope as we progress, the younger generation starts, becoming an organ donor. And, I have a couple younger brother who was like, I don't know. No, everybody's an organ donor. It's the best thing for you. I mean, you're brain dead. What are you going to do with your organs in the ground? So, um, but yeah, so I don't know. I just hope the younger generation starts, you know, being conscious about making that choice and making the right choice.
Well, and
We
we'll
have
put the link here, how you can, or where you can register to be an organ donor, if you're interested.
And if you're interested in learning more about myths and facts about organ donation, you could just Google myths and facts. You can go to our website, American Transplant Foundation. We have some great information. And that is a huge part of our work and our mission day to day, to make sure that people have the facts, not the myths.
Yep.
Well, Nick, thank you. This has been fascinating. I really
Yeah,
appreciate you giving us some insight and sharing your expertise. I learned a lot, and I'm guessing our listeners will too. So thank you so much.
yeah, of course, no problem. Anytime. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Nick.